Question 1. Has the federal government of Canada done a sufficient job in promoting a national identity? I personally believe that the government of Canada has done a sufficient job in promoting the Canadian national identity. There's in many ways that it promotes its diversity, multiculturalism, and its amazing history. The first way it's promoted its national identity is CBC and other Canadian programming. These act to promote Canadian news and television shows rather than allowing American programming to completely overpower and Americanize Canadian programming. This creates a sense of community between Canadian viewers. The second example is how Canada celebrates historic accomplishments. This is seen through Confederation and how Canada celebrates Canada Day on July 1st. The other example is Vimy Ridge. Canada has claimed land and built a monument in France to honor the soldiers that died in the battle at Vimy Ridge. This monument shows that Canada gained a sense of collective consciousness after the battle, since it is said to be the event that made Canada a true nation. Another example would be the national flag. The government had been working since 1868 to create a flag that incorporated every aspect of our national identity. Now, citizens of Canada can connect to the flag and all of its symbols. The final example to provide further evidence that Canada has done a great job in promoting its national identity is the government has responded to set out good education for students in Canada, as students learn about the importance of our history and how we can learn from our mistakes and become an even more unified and civic nation. Question 2. What lessons has history taught us about the nature of nationalism? The first lesson is that nationalism can lead to conflicts such as ultranationalism. The point at which nationalism becomes ultranationalism is when a country's nationalist actions are so strong they harm other nations. Nazi Germany is a prime example of ultranationalism. Due to Hitler's lack of effective leadership and charismatic personality, Germany went into a state of corrupt power. Germany's ultranationalism was what caused World War II. Ultranationalism in Germany meant concentration camps to kill all of the Jewish nations and indoctrinate the nation of German children to discriminate against all Jews. The Holocaust, one of the most devastating genocides, resulted from nationalism evolving into ultranationalism, and it shows just what could happen when nationalism goes too far and gets out of hand. The second lesson is nationalism can be created by citizens of a nation unifying to achieve a specific goal. A case study that proves this statement is the French Revolution. The French realized that their ruler and the estate system was destroying their way of life, so they unified to make a change. When the lower classes stormed the Bastille, it symbolized how the hierarchy was falling and a nation was forming. After the event, France was portraying more nationalist actions, creating a more well-rounded nation, with, for example, the Declaration of Rights. To this day, the storming of the Bastille represents the unity of the citizens of France, and it is celebrated annually. Due to the nationalism of the French Revolution, France has a very strong sense of collective consciousness for its nation. Question 3. To what extent should nationalism be sacrificed in the interest of internationalism? I believe that nationalism does have to be sacrificed in the interest of internationalism. This is because, although nationalism is important to a secure nation, internationalism helps global issues that could save humanity if a global issue occurred in the future. In order to have global security and safety, as well as to solve global problems, we have to sacrifice nationalism for internationalism. However, trying to balance nationalism and internationalism can be difficult. For example, when natural disasters such as hurricanes or earthquakes occur, it can change the world with no warning whatsoever. Nations who aren't involved in these disasters must provide aid to help build up the nation who was involved, while also keeping their own nation secure and safe. Nations may also violate rules of the international agreement, and to solve this problem, governments must reevaluate their foreign policy to promote the interests of their citizens, but also maintain their status in the international community. Internationalism is important because it promotes all nations in the world to accept responsibility of challenges that occur in the world, such as global warming or possible epidemics. However, nationalism is just as important because citizens want to feel safe in their own nation, which is the government's responsibility to do so. Therefore, nations have to learn to balance nationalism and internationalism, and sometimes nationalism has to be sacrificed for the good of humanity and the global community. Question number 4. How are contending nationalist and non-nationalist loyalties a challenge to the nation of Canada moving into the future? First of all, the Canadian flag has been criticized by First Nations, British, and French Canadians for not representing their culture within the Canadian flag. Contending nationalist and non-nationalist loyalties have made Canada really think about whether to stay true to their diverse representation through the maple leaf or failing to represent all of the nations within Canada with their individual symbols. Another example of how contending loyalties can be a challenge to the nation of Canada was the Quebec debate. It is a regional and cultural loyalty that Canada has not been able to reconcile. Quebec has a national interest to break from Canada and become its own nation state. The issue is that Canada has such a strong national identity that Quebecois do not know which nation to stay loyal to. The final example that could be discussed is the Kirpan. The Kirpan is a contending loyalty that Canada could not reconcile. It is a religious sword used by the Sikhs. Canada has found that the sword is a threat and has considered banning them. The Sikhs in Canada have to decide whether to stay loyal to their religion or their country. This cannot be reconciled because every attempt results in the loss of the meaning of the Kirpan, which is discrimination of the government's part. Based on the evidence provided, I believe that Canada's future might be a greater challenge because Canada may not be prepared to face its contending nationalist and non-nationalist loyalties that come about in the future. Question 5. Based on Canada's interactions with other nations, how would you expect to be treated if you traveled to other regions around the world? I believe that it depends on what region I go to. For example, we can take the Rwandan genocide. The Rwandan genocide was the mass murdering that resulted from the conflict between the two ethnic groups in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis. Violence broke out and very quickly spread throughout Rwanda. Canada believed that it was in their national interest to send the Canadian peacekeepers serving within the United Nations to Rwanda to help and try to end the genocide and restore order. Unfortunately, even with the UN in place, the genocide still went on. The UN soldiers did what they could do in that moment, but they could not prevent the violence that was happening. Today, although some citizens of Rwanda are grateful for the help we tried to give, some Rwandans still criticize Canada for not doing everything they could have done to help the genocide. So I would expect if I traveled to that region of Rwanda, some citizens may look at me differently if I said I was Canadian because of what happened with the Rwandan genocide. If I were to travel to poorer countries, I believe that I would expect to be treated with respect because Canada has helped lots of non-developed countries to further develop because of foreign aid. Canada has also helped found the United Nations, which supports any country who is going through crisis by sending troops to keep peace. So I believe that Canadians should be respected around the world for that as well. Question number 6. Pick a political cartoon that you find or have already analyzed and reflect upon the analysis of the source and why you analyzed it the way you did. The political cartoon that I have chosen is this one regarding the criticism of the trickle-down effect. The trickle-down effect is the theory that when people in developed countries have more money to spend, they will buy goods and services offered by businesses in less developed countries, and that spending will eventually help strengthen economies in the developing world. In the analysis of this cartoon, I said that the cartoonist is criticizing the theory because it doesn't work for all countries. Furthermore, the creator is implying that when using the trickle-down effect, the countries that are accumulating all of the wealth are at the top, and as you go down the pyramid, the less developed countries are not getting any money because it is all staying at the top and not trickling down like it's supposed to. I analyzed this political cartoon using critical thinking. I did this because that allows me to dig deeper and find out the true meaning of what lies beyond the cartoon, as well as it helps me figure out the perspective the cartoonist is coming from, which in this case is one with criticism and disapproval.